Welcome to the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University. We're pleased to have so many students, faculty, alumni, and other interested citizens joining us virtually this evening. I'm Richard Arenberg, visiting professor of the practice of political science and a senior fellow at the Watson Institute. I'm honored to serve this year as interim director of the Taubman Center, which is a part of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. The Taubman Center seeks to influence American politics and policy through scholarship, public opinion polling, conferences, workshops, academic research, internships, and a robust series of speakers drawn from experts, the media, academia, think tanks, and public officials. This year, we've been placing special emphasis on the 2020 national elections and now the birth of the new administration and a new Congress and the legacy of the outgoing president. Tonight, we present the 16th in our series of events. In the absence of a strong coordinated response to the coronavirus pandemic, much of the burden has been thrust in the hands of the states, particularly governors. This was true of the early response, featuring a lack of necessary PPE, even including sufficient supply of masks. Also, there was a shortage of critical equipment like ventilators as the pandemic hit its first peak in the United States. Again, we saw the federal government leave testing and contact tracing to the states. This has continued with the troubling slow distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. This national reliance on a patchwork of solutions in the 50 states and the District of Columbia has highlighted some of the strengths and weaknesses of American federalism. We're very fortunate tonight to have as our guest a former Governor John Baldacci of Maine, for a conversation about this and other aspects. Governor Baldacci began his political career at 23 years old when he was elected to the Bangor City Council. In 1982, he was elected to the Maine State Senate, where he served for 12 years. Next, in 1994, he was elected to represent Maine's 2nd Congressional District in the United States Congress, where he served until 2003. He served as Maine's governor for 2 terms, from 2003 to 2011. Currently, he works as a senior advisor for economic development and government relations at Pierce Atwood, LLP, a highly regarded law firm with a national reputation. Prior to joining Pierce Atwood in 2012, he was appointed director of the Department of Defense Military Healthcare Reform Initiative, working under the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, where he was tasked with a full-scale review and evaluation of military healthcare and wellness. While governor, Baldacci won approval for major initiatives, including a comprehensive reform of the state's healthcare system and the Pine Tree Zone program, which provides tax incentives to encourage business growth in targeted areas of Maine. My conversation tonight with Governor Baldacci will last approximately 30 minutes, after which we'll take questions from the audience. You may enter questions through the Q&A box on Zoom, which will be available to me. You may begin entering questions if you have them already, beginning now and throughout the program. Please keep them short and to the point. I'll convey as many of these questions to the governor as we have time for. This event is being recorded for later viewing, available on the Taubman Center website or the Watson Institute website. It's also being live streamed via YouTube. Now, it's my great honor to introduce you to Maine's former governor and my friend, John Baldacci. Welcome to Brown, Governor.
Rich, it's a pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate the honor to be part of this presentation and look forward to our discussion tonight. So thank you.
It's good to see you again. As I said in the introduction, we've seen over the last year the federal government's abject failure in meeting the challenge of the pandemic. In the absence of a strong coordinated response, the burden fell largely to governors. We've seen successes and failures at the state level, but most damagingly, a patchwork array of different responses. As a former governor sensitive to such issues, how do you see it?
Rich, a lot in the same way that you see it. We really lack the national direction, the national support. I thought that it was probably the worst time for this president to have this happen because he was so unfamiliar with how emergency agencies work and collaborate with the regions and local municipalities. There's an intricate network that's set up through FEMA, and it's one similar through the CDC. And it was very heartbreaking to watch this happen because it just stalled getting relief and help and support to people in some coordinated message so that we were all on the same, starting point. So it was very frustrating to see that. And then to have the states have to come up with the resources, which during this economy, they have very little of. It was very sad to see and, hurtful to a lot of families.
How has the rollout of the vaccine progressed in Maine?
We're at about 8% having gotten their first dosage of our population of 1.3 million, and probably about 2% got their second dosage so far. So I was watching Governor Cuomo earlier today, who has been a good substitute during all of this, to watch his press conferences to see how a real leader would handle things,
Yeah.
Sticking close with the Italian blood very closely, watching Andrew, but it was one in which I think, you're seeing the lack of the support and the predictability and the outright distortions of what people were dealing with. And it's just unbelievable to me that, when you're dealing with people's life and death, to suggest that you have things in the cabinet or in the pantry and the pantry really is empty, there's nothing there. And the governors don't know if they're going to get the same amount next week. So they're asked to schedule appointments and they don't know if they're going to have it. And the people get frustrated. So it's just been a real cluster. I think President Biden has come on and he's come at a very good time where, you have no place to go but up. And he's got some really talented expert people now that are ruling, the way things are governed in terms of science, not politics, and trying to regain the trust of people. So he's put it all out there. And I think he's been very forceful and, he can relate.
This reminded me in some ways of the long-standing debate over unfunded mandates. All of these regulations, programs, various things that the federal government establishes and then dumps on the state without the funding to pay for them. I'm just wondering if you had problems like that when you were governor.
Well, we had the Ebola with President Obama, and it was handled much like FEMA. There was an intricate network set up. Your CDC director would talk on morning conference calls with the national people. It was done very well, and there was resources and support there. And it was a lot of lives were lost, but it was one in which we were able to really get at the issue in a coordinated way and be able to deal with it, effectively. And I thought that was a good example. And, you can't get into these ideological battles when you have a public pandemic and you're losing hundreds of thousands of people. You get to be able to respond outside of the foxhole of your ideology. and say, what can I do to be helpful? What can I help? He had states, Rich, competing against each other for RFPs to be able to get supplies. There wasn't a national purchase. He made states go out and do this all on their own. And he said, I'll do what I can do, but, basically don't depend on me. Very sad, really. It was really.
Well, and who would have believed that the wearing of a mask recommended by all public health officials would become a partisan issue?
I know my freedoms and liberties.
Yeah.
It's like, what about secondhand smoke? Don't you have a sense that you're hurting somebody else that's next to you? Why not be part of it and be patriotic? Joe Biden had mentioned tonight, he said that somebody he had run into said, I'm not going to wear my face mask. He said, because I don't like to be told what to do. He says, well, you're not being very patriotic. You're not being very sensitive about other people. It's not just about you. And I think he is trying to take on this enormous turn of the ship of state, which has been going down a direction that is really, I think, disastrous, I think, in terms of our democracy. And he's taking it and trying to get it back to normal, not getting back to regular order, filibuster, the ways in which people know, but that he's very supportive of the filibuster.
Right.
It's one of the issues that came up in the discussions. I don't know if you saw that or not with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. But I think he wants to, and he wants to get back to the, we can disagree, but we can do it in an agreeable fashion, Rich. When I got elected in 1994, there were only a few freshman Democrats that got elected then at that year. Mm-hmm. And I remember the opening session, we were supposed to go to the Kennedy School of Government for an orientation. Gingrich became the speaker and he canceled that venue. And he had the freshman class go to the Naval Academy, and he had Rush Limbaugh be the featured keynote speaker. So I told him, I said, I can listen to him on the radio. I've got to go back to the restaurant. I said, my family needs me there, but basically he didn't want members talking with Democrats. He didn't want them being in Washington. He wanted them to go home, and all that plays well politically. But the reality is that you lose the connections.
Right.
And it wasn't until that government shutdown. I remember watching Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch and John Breaux talk about children's health care. They actually were able to work on that during the government shutdown, mm-hmm. and they all pulled the forces together, which was an enormous help to a lot of families.
Yeah, I very distinctly remember that orientation period when Gingrich came in and advised incoming Republican members of Congress not to move to Washington, to keep their homes and their families out in their district. And it, as you say, it makes a good political point, but it has a very negative effect on the relationships within the Congress. And in the years before that, when most members of Congress lived in Washington, and their families got to know each other. They saw each other at Little League games or PTA meetings or whatever it might be. And this, it made it a much more difficult to be as angry and aggressive at the other side, when you just had a barbecue with them the night before.
Exactly, Rich. And I think if you examine that time period with what Trump has been doing, Congress had the House banking scandal, they had the pension scandal, they had Ross Sinkowski, acting up, and all the issues going on. So they brought a lot of it on themselves in terms of what was hyperbole to the people back home. And Gingrich used Frank Luntz in the Contract on America to nationalize these local congressional elections that had never been nationalized before. And you see what's happening, the disgust that people have with Washington, because they weren't able to get their work done. They had to do a rescission, and they had to, sign this pact where they instituted cuts that they were unable to stop at the Department of Defense because they'd signed this pact. But that was the only way they could get things done, and you see that people are upset with Washington, and then they send us Donald Trump, to drain the swamp. The interesting side note, his last pardon and clemency was he reversed the order where it said that his people that worked in the White House couldn't lobby 5 years after they left the office.
Right.
He ensured that that was repealed when he left office. He didn't want them to be unable to earn income.
So now he's refilling the swamp. He's refilling the swamp on his way out.
Exactly.
Let me shift gears a little bit. The state of Maine often stands apart politically in some ways. A lot of attention was paid in the 2020 race for the Senate between Susan Collins and Sarah Gideon. This was the only state in the 2020 election anywhere in the country where the winner of the presidential race and the winner of the Senate seat were not of the same party. Biden received 53% of the vote in Maine and Collins about 51%. In your judgment, is there something about Maine that explains this?
I remember when Joe Lieberman, who's the senator from Connecticut, he was coming to Maine to campaign as vice president. He said, you know, he had this neighbor that was next to him that would always give him hell every time he came in. He had a camp in Maine, and he talked about this guy, and he didn't know whether he was a Democrat or Republican. He said, but he's got a new party for him. He calls them the irascible parties. You know, Mainers are an independent breed. When I was elected to Congress, we had a Republican congressman in the 1st district, which was very unusual because it's a very liberal district. I was in the 2nd district. Angus King was governor and independent. George Mitchell was a Democrat. Bill Cohen was a Republican. But we all worked together. Maine is such a small state. It's a rural state, agricultural. Families and people have to work together. You know, we can argue, you know, about things going on, but at the end of the day, we got to share harvesters, we got to share work crews. We got to understand that, you know, if you got any help, it's going to be your neighbors that come forward, you know, and that's the way Maine usually is. I mean, we have our uprisings and our concerns, but at the same time, I think there's a good quality there underneath that fabric.
And I think it's a state where politics is particularly substantive. In a lot of states, the battles are almost sport, but in Maine, the debate about issues really matters very deeply, I think.
Oh yeah, no, George would come home from Washington and he'd use 95 pages to talk about a vote, you know, that was the analysis. You probably drafted a lot of those speeches.
When my first experience with Maine, when I first went to work for George Mitchell, was it was at the time that Rehnquist had been appointed as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the confirmation vote was coming up, and Mitchell didn't know what he was going to do, and Bill Cohen on the other side, the Republican, didn't know what he was going to do. They both labored through all sorts of meetings and discussions, and neither one of them really made the decision until they went down to the floor to vote, to tell you the truth. But what really gave me my first lesson in Maine was Mitchell voted against Rehnquist, Cohen voted for Rehnquist, and the Portland Press Herald praised both of them for the process by which they made their decision. So that was an eye-opener for me.
Well, I think in our state, not that it's any better than any other state, but the way we practice it, you just have to explain yourself. I think Susan Collins needed to explain herself. You know, she had been recorded as saying that Trump learned his lesson, you know, after the impeachment vote, that he kind of touched the hot stove and wasn't going to go near it again. You know, so she had to explain herself on her votes, you know, during the impeachment trial, and different votes for Kavanaugh and things like that. Just Maine people want to hear it. They're willing to give you the deference, but at the same time, your responsibility as the United States Senator is come and explain yourself. And, you know, I was so proud when I was down in Washington, met up with you and Senator Mitchell, and Senator Muskie has been retired at that time, but a number of people who regarded Senator Muskie with iconic,
Sure.
ideal, visions of what he did and what he brought about. And then he told me about Madeleine Albright used to work in his office and take his kids to school. He was telling me about different people that were involved, but Maine has had an opportunity, and they're very proud that it's a very low populated state, but it likes to send national leaders to Washington. And what have you done for the people today is very important.
Well, along those same lines, Maine is one of only 2 states, Nebraska's the other, of course, that doesn't award electoral college votes on a winner-take-all basis. Since 1972 in Maine, 1 vote is allocated for each congressional district and 2 at large. Maine's 2nd congressional district, which you represented in the House, supported Trump with more than 52% of the vote, even as it reelected Jared Golden to the House seat. Is the divided electoral vote a good idea? And how do you see these results?
Well, yeah, it's changed a lot. Well, it hasn't changed a lot. My district, the 2nd district, is very agricultural, natural resource based. Farmers, forestry people, fishermen, hardworking family businesses, local businesses. They tend to be more conservative, At the same time that they're suffering and struggling, they felt that the Democrats had left them behind with these NAFTA trade deals and with the Chinese trade deals. And Trump comes in on his pony and he starts telling them that he'll straighten it all out, and he won't forget them. He played them to a tune where they felt he was going to watch out for him. He was going to watch out for the lobstermen. He was going to watch out for, so he really worked that district hard in terms of manufacturing that we lost through the international agreements. The paper manufacturing has gone down to almost nothing. And he just seized on that issue and played that issue. It tends to be very, agricultural, natural resource, whereas the 1st district tends to be more urban and metropolitan and Portland-like, where 45% of the population is, but you'll never be able to change the makeup of the districts because when I was in Bangor at the restaurant and we were in northern Maine, central Maine. People in Worcester County hate it when you say that Bangor is northern Maine. They're up by the Canadian border. But anyways, it was a very difficult thing to run from south to north. Tom Andrews, Tom Allen had difficulty. And Sarah Gideon to a small extent, because she was new on the trail, she ran from Freeport, which is, it's easier to run north to south in Maine than it is south to north, because they just look at you as, somebody from Boston, or New York, you don't understand the troubles that people are going through. I remember this story this one farmer told me when I was campaigning for Congress in '94. Politician was up promising him he was going to reduce the trade gap. He was not going to have to work as much and he was going to get more for his potato yield. He looked down at the politician in the field that they were talking, and he was standing on a cow pie. And he asked and the farmer began to smile, and the politician said, "Why are you smiling?" He says, "It appears like you're beginning to melt." So there's the disdain they have for politicians.
Well, Maine also now uses ranked choice voting, allowing voters to rank their preferred candidates as a way of assuring that election winners receive a majority vote after factoring in second choices. This was not a factor in the presidential, senatorial, or House races this year, but I'm curious about your view.
I supported it, Rich, and I supported it because it was like having an instant runoff in the general election. So you had it all done at one time. You're able to choose who's your second or third choice. And I felt, because of the negativism in campaigns, that there was an opportunity for an opponent to not be so mudslinging and negative towards his opponent or her opponent, because they wanted to get their votes on the second round or the third round. So it would raise the level of the debate that took place because of that interest, because it never stops. I mean, they go at it tooth and nail, but at the same time, I believe that it would help to elevate the debate and have an instant runoff at one time. They're still fighting and trying to gather referendum signatures to repeal it, but the more it's on the referendum ballot, the more support it gets.
Yeah.
People like it. They've gotten used to it. The one thing that it does, election night, you can't declare a winner sometimes because you have to count the votes, the second and third choices. So it delays the celebration of the party, but pandemic took care of all of that anyways.
Well, many of the analysts nationally looking at the Maine Senate race for much of the time thought that it might really come into play because of the third party candidates, if it was very close.
Yeah, they actually did polling, Rich, in terms of the second and third choices of people. And a lot of the polls had Sarah Gideon winning on the second or third round. That's why we were all surprised when Susan won the race by 9 points.
Right. Okay, one last question about Maine's independence. Keep putting you on the spot, speaking for the entire state of Maine.
I don't mind.
Many of my students over the years have been curious about third parties and independent candidates. Maine stands out because it's elected one of the two independents in the Senate, Angus King, and twice since 1975 has elected an independent governor for the state of Maine. King himself and James Longley, who actually defeated George Mitchell for governor. Are there circumstances in the Maine electoral environment that explains this, and has it worked out well for Maine?
There's an attitude sometimes, if you think you're too big for your britches, that Mainers will take the air out. And I think that, sometimes our politicians, when they're campaigning, are the humblest of personalities. And I think people have a tendency to do that. They're very independent minded. So if you tell them that, we probably aren't going to vote for me, I'm a victim and, I have everybody working against me, there's a tendency to rise up in those occasions. And it doesn't matter. It could be a third party. When I ran for Congress in '94, it was a four-way contest. I had a Republican, a Green Party person, and an independent, all being organized by the Republican to bring my totals down so that they would be able to beat me out in a four-way race. But Mainers are open to listening to people. It doesn't matter, who they are. I think we came into the Union in 1820 as a free state with Missouri, a slave state. And I said that they've always taken and drank that water because any discriminations, whether it's gay marriage, gay rights, whether it's any transgender rights, whether it's any discrimination, there's a feeling in Maine, no matter where you're located, that if somebody's picking on somebody, it won't be long before they'll be picking on you. So we've got to stand in, the people in Maine. Howard University is named after a general from Maine who served during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. And the South hated him because he was rebuilding all of these institutions, favoring the slaves that had just been released. But that's where Howard University comes from. Elijah Cummings was telling me the great story about that. I didn't realize that till Black History Month.
Well, speaking of your time in the House of Representatives, you spent 4 terms in the House. Democrats were in the minority for your whole congressional career. The Speaker and the majority run things in the House through the Rules Committee. So just how frustrating is it to serve in that body in the minority?
You have to find a path to be able to do things and accomplish things. I was very lucky, Rich. When I got elected the first time in '94, I was the only Democrat in the delegation. President Clinton, being a Democrat, would consult with me on judicial appointments, on appointments that were taking place in Maine. Yeah. I had more power as a freshman Democrat than most freshman Democrats. Yeah. Of course, I had Senator Muskie as a consultant along with Senator Mitchell, so I wasn't going to go very far, in terms of off the rails.
Right.
But I felt like we worked on trade issues with Mickey Cantor. I worked with Secretary Rubin when we were the first time we balanced the budget in the history, I think since the country was founded almost, with Bill Clinton. And then we had welfare reform, but we were able to accomplish a lot, and I was part of that because the president and I hit it off pretty well. You know, we got to be good friends. We went to Army, Navy quite a bit. You know, he enjoyed playing golf and hitting a few mulligans, which he was famous for. But we became good friends. So I found a way to work with the administration and to be effective in that light, you know. So I felt like, even though I wasn't in the majority in Congress, I was doing a lot more administratively, you know, to help out with USDA and farmers, to help out in terms of the issues that they were having problems with trade. You know, and then the president in his negotiations on the Chinese trade pact, and, you know, I couldn't support him and I couldn't be part of that because I just didn't think we were leaving our farmers and manufacturers any kind of roadmap to repair and rebuild. We were just moving on and leaving them behind, you know, and now since Senator Dashiell's work and others have built that practice up, so there's a lot more resources and support for laid off workers due to trade deals.
So the Senate has just actually begun today conducting the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. How do you see the role that Trump played in the armed attack on the Capitol? And how important is it to prohibit Trump from running for office in the future? As part of that, actually, does it make sense to you to actually be carrying out an impeachment and trial of a president that's already left office?
I don't know where to start in with him, Rich. I would have gotten rid of him a long time ago, really. But it brought back a lot of unfortunate memories because I was in the Capitol during 9/11 with a good friend of mine, Mike Doyle from Pennsylvania. We just finished having breakfast. And we were told to get back to our offices because we had just been under attack. I'm thinking to myself, where's our Department of Defense? Where's our intelligence? We're just finding out about this now. And then to watch the Pentagon on fire and losing lives, we went over the next day. And then to have that president direct a crowd of people to storm the Capitol, it was really very emotional for me because we were attacked from the outside. And at the end of the day, back in 9/11, Henry Hyde and Barney Frank were holding hands, singing "God Bless America."
Right.
I was asking them to light a torch and burn the place down, you know. And I thought, that's a sacred place. That's their democracy. That's where we all have our rights established. It's, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, I just don't know what to say. I got so angry about it and so emotional about it that it was very bothersome. I think he should never run. He should never be able to run again. Although I hate to think of doing things that to people, but he should never be able to run again. And hopefully, I keep hoping that he would have read history or he would have understood, he would have been inquisitive or something, you know, just hoping that something happened. And, you know, but he get onto something, you know, and there were some things that he did on trade that he tried to make an attempt on taxes, try to bring the offshore money back on our soil. There were some things that he tried to do that made sense, but he then kicked the pail after he did that. And he just never could stay on the right course, you know, for the country's sake, you know, and it was a very difficult time. And then to try to have an uprising and to try to get the Attorney General to be the right one to give you an opinion. Nixon would blush at the stuff that this guy was doing, trying to do. I mean, it was really subversive, and his relationship with Russia, Rich. That was bothersome to me because I look at him during a press conference and I didn't know whether he was on our side or their side. And then someone told me that he's on his side. You know, it's just the better, it's not Joe Biden will do a terrific job. He'll be a great president, and Kamala Harris will do a great job as vice president. So I'm very, very pleased for the country's sake that Trump is not there. But it shows you how fragile things are and how we can lose them. If you had somebody who knew what they were doing and was more sophisticated, they wouldn't be so you know, he telegraphed a lot of his punches.
Right. And often was not that competent at what he was trying to get done. But I agree with you that you know, I think we've seen an administration that could potentially be a future template for a future president who perhaps is much more skilled at it.
Like a Hawley or Cruz.
Yes, right, exactly.
That's the danger that you have. There's somebody from the Atlantic wrote a piece about Donald Trump's offshore fund of laundering money and that sort of thing. It followed him around for a long period of time. And he said, you know, he if he was smarter, he could have got away with a lot more and done a lot of terrible things. But we were lucky that he wasn't as sophisticated. Not to say that the next generation of Trumps wouldn't be a little bit more sophisticated than the first. The dynasty.
Maybe it's a hard question to ask a Democratic politician, but do you have, looking at it from the outside, do you have any expectations about the sort of coming battle within the Republican Party to in the wake of Donald Trump?
Well, the writer Friedman had written a piece about what's happening is that the moderates in the Republican Party may be leaving the Republican Party, and the moderates in the Democratic Party may be leaving the Democratic Party down the road. He thinks that there may be emerging of the two moderates into some type of organized party or alliance of sorts, because he thought that the Republicans were just having that much difficulty. I think it's possible. Dick Gephardt used to tell us that the one thing he worries about is that we become a lot like Europe and we end up turning it into like a European style government where the ins are in and the outs are out. You know, and you put the prime minister, and the prime minister has all his people instituted rather than going through confirmation. I think that would be a big mistake. But I think that the people have to understand, I think through your center and the work that you're doing and others are doing, that this is a very fragile thing. And why is it set up that way? Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House, but they don't control the Supreme Court. There's always a check and balance in our system. It serves the filibuster. It's built that way so that we don't do anything and take away people's rights by being too efficient. If government were more efficient, it would take rights away from individual citizens, and the founders do not want to have that happen. So at the very top of our pyramid is the individual, and that does not happen in any other country in the world, or the history of any country in the world.
You're right, but you can take inefficiency too far.
Because then they'll throw everybody out and bring on Donald.
Right. Exactly. Now, I know our students and many in our audience tonight are Brown students. Love to hear about how successful politicians like yourself got into politics and climbed the ladder. Your family ran a restaurant in Bangor called Mama Baldacci's, and spaghetti fundraisers were a part of all of your campaigns. Talk a little bit about all of that.
Well, I was very lucky, Rich, because George is related. So we talked politics a lot when I went to visit with him and my grandmother down in Waterville when he was a speech.
That's George Mitchell you're referring to, right?
And Bill Cohen used to bring the rolls from the bakery with his father over to the restaurant because they got them every day, to the bulky rolls, to work with this. We were bipartisan in the restaurant business long before politics. So I knew Bill very well, and frankly, we worked together very well. But that's the way Maine is, you know. So I grew up in that environment. And Jack Kennedy, my father was a Kennedy delegate in 1960, so I got to go to see President Kennedy campaign in Bangor, Maine when I was 5 years old. And it was like a rock.
the restaurant you ran was a gathering place in the morning for kind of a political bull session, often attended by one senator or another, or
Defense or somebody who was a sheriff or a city councilor.
right.
Father was him and mom had 8 children, and they were very determined that they would be involved in their communities and trying to help people. Earning income, being prominent, yes, but what did you do for the people today? He washed dishes while I was in the state senate, and I came back and we were working out front, and he stopped me right away. And I said, Dad, I got to get out front. I got to set up the bar. I got to see parties. Mom's got to leave. He said, I didn't wash dishes all day so that you would be able to gallivant back and forth. I want to know what you did for the people today. I became governor after he passed away. I did a big sign on the back of my desk. What did you do for the people today? But we were raised that way. So all of us have been involved, you know, in one facet or another of my brothers and sisters. And that was important. My dad would always check and see what we did, who did we work with, and what did we accomplish? And it would always be about the people. So I grew up in that environment. You know, he worked with me when I ran for the city council. And Joe Brennan was doing bean suppers. And I said, I got to be who I am. I got to be true to myself. I said, we don't have beans on the menu. I said, I got to do spaghetti dinners. I said, and people started saying, because we did a good job making spaghetti dinners. And people would always say, is it real or is it canned? If it's canned, I'm not voting for you. It's got to be with sauce. So we just started doing spaghetti dinners, and they had a lot of fun doing it. We'd raise money, give it to a local charity, gave people an opportunity to go to an event that didn't want to spend $500 or $1,000, you know, but they wanted to be active. They wanted to be listened to. They wanted to be part of it. So all my consultants would say, you should be calling fundraising. You should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing these things because it takes away from fundraising phone calls. And I said, look, you've got to have a good ground campaign with an air campaign. I said, they both need to work together. And this is who I am. And I think Washington consultants are the worst breed because they think they know all the answers, but they're usually a day late and $1 short because you got to listen to your heart and your stomach, and you got to trust your own judgments. You can't listen to somebody else because you're going to be the one on the line. It's going to be your name, you know, so you want to do it your way. So that's how I got involved. My dad and I, when I was on the Bangor City Council, he thought I should run for the state senate. So he was a big influence on me in terms of politics, and people regarded him very well because he was a very honest man. You know, he invested in his large family and made sure that they were all good and upstanding. I mean, we go to church and we take up 2 pews, and we had so much after Christmas, we got walkie-talkies that we'd be talking with my brothers in church during mass with the walkie-talkie. My father just got so upset, but it was just, we were very fortunate. We were very, very fortunate, great parents, instilled great values in us. And we learned to work hard for very little money because it builds character. That's what my mother would always say, it builds character.
Do you have any advice for young people who want to take that first step?
That's an excellent question because people ask me, what do you suggest I should do to be successful? There's no formula, but what there is a commitment. My father always said, you can't do anything halfway. John, if you're going to run for Congress, because it was a big leap for me to run for Congress in '94, it was not a Democratic year, but Dad wasn't feeling well, and I wanted to do it because he thought I should do it. And I put everything on the line. I emptied my bank accounts. I put everything on the line. I campaigned morning till night. My brother Paul helped out covering for me at the restaurant. But I think young people just need to put everything into it. If you that way you win or lose, you've done it 100%. So I think if you try to keep a foot in and be safe, I don't want to throw it all on this, you know, I don't want to, you're not going to win. You got to believe in yourself and believe yourself so that you put it all out there. And I think that's whatever you want to push, that's the route to success.
Oh, great. Let's take a few questions from the audience.
Sure.
To what extent should the blame of the poor vaccine rollout be blamed on the federal government versus the states?
On the rollout, 95% to the federal government.
Mhm.
They've got the vaccine distributors. They got the general in charge of the distribution, this warped speed plan that they were going to work on. I mean, they're the ones driving that. The governors are just sitting there waiting like a catcher for the ball to come in from the pitcher. So, I mean, maybe 5%, but some, but not, I mean, mostly it's the federal government.
Mhm. Does the difficulty seen in handling the pandemic at the gubernatorial level help us shed light on other potential issues that governors struggle to handle without federal support?
It's an excellent question, and students are going to do very well in your class. But that's an excellent question. I think that when you're seeing with the pandemic, if you study how FEMA operates, James Lee Witt used to be the FEMA director under President Clinton. And he always used to say, you want to make sure when FEMA goes in, we don't create a second disaster. You know, and he tried to right size FEMA, and he got it down so that they collaborated. They put people on the ground in each of the areas that are affected. They work closely with the National Weather Service. And I think if they use that model, and they have with CDC, I've got to believe that they've got the same structure with CDC, but Trump never implemented it. And I think that you have a system already established where there's collaboration. The states can provide some guidance about where it should be, who needs the support, you know, merging the federal and state to collaborate. But it's going to be the federal people that have the financial resources and the personnel and the ability to make sure that when you need ventilators, when you need to have masks, when you need to have swabs, they can use the Defense Production Act, they can use the National Arm, but do it on behalf of all 50 states. Don't leave us competing with New York or Boston. You know, we just don't have the population to compete. We'll be on the end of the pipeline, but doing it nationally. So there has to be this national leadership, national support, at the same time, local guidance, local direction, and making sure that you're working with the local first responders, the police and fire. You know, you're using, you know, whatever networks that are out there, you know, and you need to have that impact needs to be there. When I did Maine emergency management meetings, you wouldn't believe the array of talent in fish and wildlife that was being impacted, transportation with roads and bridges, the National Guard in terms of using their personnel. There's so many resources that are being used at the local and state level. You need to have them coordinate with the federal people. And that really needs to be done with the pandemic. And I think that Biden is using the FEMA model as for how he's addressing the pandemic. And I think that's very smart on his part.
Yeah, when you look around the world at countries all over the globe that have done a better job of dealing with this horrible pandemic than the United States has. And that's when you really take a step back and think about that, it's really shocking.
Yeah, I think what you see there is strong national leadership in whatever country it is. You know, we just need to act together. We're all in the, I was kind of hoping when after the president got I didn't hope that he got the illness, but I was hoping that he'd see the danger of this thing, and that we now all of a sudden he had an aha moment and we'd all be on the same side. Instead of fighting with each other and not addressing the pandemic, we'd be all on the same side of the field. It just never happened. You know, and that's the unfortunate thing. We were always fighting with Dr. Fauci. What did he say? Who did he say it to? I'm going to fire him when I finish this campaign.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, look, you know, let's put this all together. I mean, it was an opportunity for him to galvanize the nation to breeze through re-election. But to his own demise, you know, he kicked the pail, and he was going to focus more on other things rather than the pandemic and not take any responsibility.
What is one resource that was available to governors that you feel like they did not make use of to handle the pandemic? And what is a resource that was not available, was missing, that would have been of great help?
That's an excellent question. You know, that takes some thought.
Yes.
That really does take some thought. I think that the state is having the problem now is they're trying to develop a registry computer system to log in appointments and vaccinations. And because of it's not the lawyers that are the problem anymore, Rich, in today's world, it's the IT people. They run everything. You know, if you don't have a new IT system running smoothly, you don't have anything.
Hmm.
And I think that they're looking for that type of a system that they can do it. And it actually should be done maybe on a national basis, you know, working with Microsoft and Amazon and all the big IT giants. They should come up with a system, computer system, where people can log on and then they can get to arrange their appointments, because by midsummer, early fall, they should have more than, they say, 300 million people's vaccinations available. So what they're going to be probably doing between now and then is lining up the populations in terms of registering them for, and then having a callback. So that would take a big relief off people's minds. And then I'd use that we have a 211 system, an information system on our phones. And I'd have plugged into that, you know, messages to help, you know, not just wearing masks and doing this, but just the latest information. I think people are looking for honest information. So I'd use that computer or phone system that we set up for the registry to also be an information message system set up to people, almost like Medicare is set up now to help people on Medicare. I'd have that kind of a structure so people wouldn't be calling, trying to speak to a doctor or a nurse or anybody like that, but they get a lot of the basic primary information, primary health information on that line like that do with Medicare. Something like that. It's a very good thing to think about.
Right. Yeah. How can Americans read into Paul LePage's governorship in Maine between both yourself and Governor Mills, who both seem so very different?
Thank you for the distinction. Paul LePage, quote, Rich, he says he was Trump before Trump. You know, he's not, when we have a traditional meeting before he takes office, he meets with the current governor and he's sworn in a couple of weeks afterwards. And we usually show him around, show him the governor's residence and have lunch with his family, and it should be a social time. He says to me at the first meeting, he says, you know, the problem with you, Baldacci, he says, you're too nice. I didn't know what to say at first. And then I said, well, my grandmother always told me you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. And he says to me, he says, I got no honey. He says, I said, no kidding. He's just a bombastic, loves to see his name in print. And I think he's like Trump. They can't stand to be out of the spotlight. And it's all about the spotlight for these people and ordering people around like they were some kind of autocrat. You know, you're going to do this, I'm going to tell you to do. And he scares people. He gets people to cower, which is should never take place in a democracy. Harry Truman used to say that you can become elevated after your service in office, become a private citizen. They don't treat people like that. Name calling, you know, and foul language. But it happens because there's an element of people that, you know, think that that's non-traditional. He's shaking them up. He's non-traditional. He's telling them what we'd like to tell all the politicians. So I think that the best advertisement, he's thinking about running against Janet Mills. I think the best quote to use with him is he was Trump before Trump. Quote unquote, Paul LePage.
This audience member asks, serving as both a governor and a congressman, what was a more enjoyable experience for you? Which allowed you to serve Mainers most?
I think that I think being governor of the state of Maine was the most honorable honor that I could ever have achieved. And to be put in a position, Rich, where you set the agenda for your state as a laboratory of 50 states every day, and you watch what other states do, you work with other governors, you work with the congressional people. I think being governor is an opportunity to make an impact, in which we tried to do with healthcare, because I'd seen the fighting going on with when President Clinton's wife tried to get healthcare going. So I was determined that I would try to get health care. And we created Dirigo Healthcare, which would be a subsidy program. It wouldn't have all the bells and whistles of Medicaid in terms of services, but it would be a quality health program to help people get healthier. As long as they were working, we'd help them and their employees with subsidies to maintain it. We used surplus money that we had. We didn't raise taxes. And so I was able to be, and I had people from Boston working with me because Romney was no longer there and they weren't able to work. Romney was in office and they weren't able to do any work in Boston and Cambridge. So they came to Maine to help me work on my Dirigo healthcare program, which President Obama ended up making Obamacare out of during his administration. So I think being governor of a state is a huge honor. It's very awesome and it's very humbling, because after you're sworn in, the first words out of the person's mouth is "God save the state of Maine." So it doesn't give you a lot of confidence. And they leave you alone on stage, and you gotta leave the stage, and you don't know whether to go right or left. And you think, oh, this is a great way to start. But it was an honor. It was a real honor. And although I enjoyed Washington, I became very close with President Clinton, and I enjoyed being able to join him at a few events. And I was able to work with my colleagues. We ended up rooming together with other members of Congress who were Republicans over at C Street. So we wanted to let them know we didn't have horns and they didn't have horns, and if we could work on things together. So that was Steve Largent, who was a great guy, very conservative, and John Ensign, and your friend, the guy from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham.
My friend. Yeah, well, over the years, I saw a lot of former governors elected to the Senate, and almost without exception, they were very unhappy there, because having been a governor, as you know far better than I do, when a governor makes a decision, things happen.
Yeah.
When a congressman makes a decision, they cast a vote.
Yeah, that's right. There's only one cash register, and it's in the governor's office. Yeah, no, you're right. I remember when we did gay marriage, and we did the bill, and it was a challenging time, because as a Catholic growing up, it wasn't exactly, I thought civil unions would be suffice, and that marriage would be for the church and civil unions would be for, the civil ceremonies. But when you read the Constitution, they tell you that equal protection under the law, you can't have unequal relationships. And we became the first state to actually not be forced into it, but do it willingly, and signed it into law. Of course, they held a couple of referendums afterwards, but we signed it into law. I mean, it was just heart-rending to listen to the farmers and their families in the public hearings and what people and families had to go through. And I think that resonated with Maine people, because they saw that, these are regular people, farmers, fishermen, their families have a person who's gay and who's been hiding in a closet, and, it's not good. It's not healthy. It's not the way our society should be, and just their testimony was just very impactful. So it was a good process. But we were able to make a difference as a governor. You're able to help people directly. We have the power of pardon and clemency.
Well, I want to thank you so much for having joined us in this great conversation this evening. And I know that if we weren't on virtual screens like this, the audience would be on their feet now applauding you, Governor. So
You're very
on their behalf, I want to thank you.
well. I appreciate that very much. If I was in front of you, I'd be saying we're going down to Federal Hill and have a good Italian feast down in Providence.
Well, we'll look
I
forward
thank
to
you.
that. We'll do it.
I'd like to do that, Rich. It's really been nice to see you, and I wish you the best. I was very impressed with your questions and your students' work. and Samantha did a great job. So you got a great organization there, and I appreciate and honored to be invited to be part of it. So thank you very much, and thank your students.
Thanks for that.